Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for the Secretariat Quarterly Product Webinar. We are going to be discussing how to use Suite Manager to enhance your data security and the integrity of your data. Calling this webinar Managing Suite Manager. And now on your screen, you should see a poll question. We are very interested in your feedback. So if you could take a second to answer that question, and then we are going to dive right into the content. Okay, thank you everyone. So let's dig right in. First, let me make this visible the entire time so we can follow along better. And so to start off, the objectives of this webinar, we want you all to be able to use the Worldview Sites feature of Secretariat to control what your users have access to. Secondly, we want you to be able to use profiles, view and type profiles to quickly and reliably control what users are able to access in the database. Then we're going to cover user permissions and group security, so that way you can control what your users are able to do with the information in Secretariat. And bottom line, we want you to be able to confidently manage your users and the data. So to accomplish this, we are going to be first discussing some key terms, going over some of the key points that we'll be talking about so that we're all on the same page and have the appropriate context for the conversation. Then we're going to discuss Worldview Sites, how to and when to use that functionality. Then we'll discuss profiles, view and type profiles again. And then we'll go into security permissions, looking at how to use that feature. Finally, we'll touch on some tips and tricks, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Now, as I mentioned that, as we're going through the content here, if you have a question, chat it to all panelists, and then we will address those all at the end. So as you think of questions, type them in, and we'll save some time at the end to go over all of those. So the key terms, Worldview Site. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, a Worldview Site is a method for segmenting your entities into managed groups, providing particular access, read-only, read-write, or no access as appropriate. And this is the highest level of division that you can have for your entities and your users. Then secondly, we have view profiles, which are settings that are applied to specific user groups which control what they see in the database. Then we have type profile, and this is information that is applied to all users, and this essentially controls what the database is showing to the users. Then we have security attributes, and this is the permissions that define what users are able to do. And then security groups, which is a way for bulk editing what users have permission for. And then finally, override access, which refers to the ability to set security permissions for a user unique within a group. And so just to give an overview of how all of these things play together, like I mentioned before, Worldview Site is the highest level of security, followed by the type profile, which controls what the information is being shown to a user, and then the view profile, which controls what the user is able to see, then the group security, what they're able to do, and then the user security, what each individual user is able to do. And so is sort of a real-world example of how this applies. I thought about this in terms of selecting a college class. And so the biggest determining factor when you're thinking about picking a class is, first and foremost, what college you go to is going to determine what is available. And then the semester, whether that's fall or spring semester, determines what college classes that college is going to make available. And then the view profile is kind of like your major. It is a filter that determines what classes you're going to be seeing and choosing. And then group security, kind of like what year you are, what you're able to do, what classes you're able to enroll in. And then user security, exactly which class you as an individual are going to choose. So hopefully that helps clarify some of the distinctions between how all of these things play together. So let's go into worldview sites. And so we are going to use worldview sites, here's an example, to create separate views of the database for international users and domestic users. So we'll start off by opening Suite Manager, and then we are going to click down here to Worldview Sites. And then to start off, initially we need to enable Worldview Security. And then notice here it's checked Entities Only. This is a best practice because when you have entities and people, you'll have to be creating multiple people records within each worldview. And so we recommend that Entities Only is selected as an easier way to manage your information. And so I have the international group already created, so I would select New. And this is going to bring up the description, which is the name, and then the abbreviation that you want to apply for this particular worldview. Type in domestic, and then I click Save. And then here we have the different worldviews set up as we want. And then the next thing to do is click back out to Suite Manager. And then now we need to click to Security Attribute Profiles. And here what we need to do is create profiles for each of those worldviews. So we click over to Worldview Sites. And here I have 3 already created. And so you click New to create one, but we'll edit here. And then international, how I have it set up is domestic is read-only, and entity common group is going to refer to the entities that were created before the worldview sites were established that exist between the databases shared. And then international, I want these users to be able to read and write. So save and close. And then domestic, we're going to have read-write access, and then read-only for the common group and the international. And then finally, my administrative users, I want them to be able to read-write on every entity. And so save and close those 3 profiles. And now we want to assign users to those profiles, to those worldviews. And so click over to Users and Groups now. And then what I'll need to do is create a group for my international users as an example. So click New. Description of the group is the name that you want to apply. International, save and close. And then I'm going to click Edit to change the permissions. And so here we have the name of the group, and then I'll click over to the security attributes, where I can control what those users are able to see. And so I will click down to Secretariat, highlight that here. I want to make sure that they are allowed to see the information. And then I'll scroll down, and then Worldview Sites will become visible, and I will click Limited here, which means that I want them to have limited access to worldviews. And I click Edit. And then this is where I will assign them to the profile that I want. And so as I mentioned, this is the international group, so I select international, and then this is the access that is going to be applied. So domestic, they have no access. The entity common group is read-only, and then international is read-write. I click save, and then I'll click save again to save that information, and I'll come over here to membership, and I'll want to add users. And so for this example, I'm just going to add myself. So I scroll down, and there is my name there, and I'll click over to add me to that group. And then, as an example, I will log into Secretariat. And so here is my view of the entities page. And so now you can see Worldview Site has been added as a column. And now what I'll do is I will just click into to view this information. And so as you can see, I'm able to read all of this information because this is part of the common group. But then when I click over to edit, I have no write privileges for this Worldview Site. And now if I were to click back out to entities and I wanted to create a new one, you'll see that I can type in the information, but this Worldview Site field here, my only option is to create an international because that is the only Worldview Site where I have the ability to write new information. And now what I will demonstrate is if you click back out to the main page, the Tools menu will show up in the right corner. When you navigate to the Tools menu, you can click down to Preferences and then click over to Worldview, and then you can see what Worldview access you are able to see. And now what I can do here is I can uncheck Entity Common Group, which means now I will only be able to see the international entities. And then I click back to Entities, and here you can see that I'm no longer able to view the Entity Common Group. I've segmented it, so only I'm able to see the international Worldview. And now, if I were logged in as an administrative user with unlimited access, and so do note that this is unlimited, it's not necessarily the administrative view, but unlimited, which gives a user the ability to click on this Site Administration button. This becomes available for users with unlimited Worldview access, and this is a wonderful tool, which when you click on, brings up this menu, which allows you to quickly reassign entities to a different worldview. So if this is a new segmentation that you're implementing, this is going to be an extremely fast way to reassign different entities to the appropriate worldviews. All you need to do is click next to the entities that you want to move over, and then click this arrow, and that's going to bring them over to this international worldview. And you can move them back and forth by selecting these drop-downs as appropriate. And so that covers our foray into Worldview Sites. And now, again, if you have any questions, do chat those to all panelists, and we'll make sure to address those at the end. Now, we're going to talk about type profiles. And again, this is essentially a definition of what the database is going to show to all users. And so, for this example, we are going to use the type profile settings to enable a tab. And this tab we're going to enable is Canadian information for a group of entity types. So if you were moving into Canadian territory with a new business and you needed to enable this tab to better manage your entities, this is the way to do it. And so we will click into Suite Manager, type profiles here at the top. We're going to select there. And then I want to enable this tab for corporate entities, so I highlight that, and then I click Edit. And then here, I can see what is all available as the different tabs as read-only or hidden, and we can see that Canadian information is currently hidden. But before I make any changes, I want to see which entity types are going to be affected. And this is all the entity types that fall under the corporate entities umbrella. And that's how I want to make the changes. And so I click back to the type profile here. And then I'm going to uncheck this hidden box. And we'll see there that it is now made available, and I'll save it. And then as an example, we'll open up an entity in Secretariat. And so now what users are going to be able to see is this Canadian information tab on the left. So we have made this field now available for the database to display to all users. And so that is a quick look at how to use the type profiles functionality. Now, if you have questions, again, chat those to all panelists, and we are going to move on to view profiles. So view profiles, again, are a way to control what your users are able to see. And so in this example, we're going to change the information that's visible for our business unit access users, and we want to hide the contact information for people stored in Secretariat. So we will open up Suite Manager, and here we are going to select View Profiles, and now we will navigate down to Business Unit Access, edit that, and then that will open up the View Profile settings here. And what I want to do is I want to make the changes to the people that are stored in Secretariat. So I click down to People, and then now I will see all this information here. And so as part of the contact information, or as part of the, let's see, as part of the base information, I will click down excuse me, a few slides got out of order there, but you can see that now I have actually just slid over here, and the people contact info, I have now marked that as hidden. And so this is going to hide that tab from the business unit access users. And so I will click Save. And then in Secretariat, what you have the ability to do is in the tool settings, you can actually choose a view profile. So if you assign yourself to multiple view profiles, you can use this as a way to actually see what your users will have access to who are assigned to these different view profiles. And so I just made the changes to the business unit access users. And so I will change the profile to this. And then when I click over to a people record, now I can see that this contact information is all hidden. And so if you needed to protect sensitive information from a subset of users, view profiles is going to be the quickest and easiest way to complete that task. So moving on, we are going to look at setting security permissions, and we are going to first do this at the group level. And so in this example here for this webinar, we are going to use security attributes to limit the ability to use certain wizards for a group of users. And so, as usual, we're going to start in Suite Manager. And the first thing that we need to do is create a security attribute profile that limits the wizard access. So we'll click here, and then at the top we'll move over to wizard access. And for Secretariat, I'm going to define a group simply called a few wizards, which I will edit. And then I want to deny access to the corporate meeting wizard, the global appoint wizard, and the global sort update wizard. And so I mark these all as deny, and then I click save, and then navigate back to the home page of Suite Manager, and then I'm going to come over to users and groups. And so I will select groups at the top here. And now what I want to do is I want to change my full access user, so I highlight that and then click edit. And that is going to bring up the group information here, where I will be able to see the membership, who is a part of this group already. And then I will also be able to see the view profiles assigned to this group. And as a best practice, we do recommend that you only assign one view profile per group. This is an easier way to manage what your group or what your users as members of a group are able to see. And then to define the wizard access, I'm going to click over to Security Attributes, and then select down to Secretariat. And I need to make sure that Secretariat access is allowed. And then wizard access right now is unlimited, but we want to limit that for this group of users. So we select here, move this over to limited, and then now we want to click edit. And that's going to bring up this window where we are able to select the profile that we created just before. So set this drop down, select the A Few Wizards profile, and now we can see and change the profile here. And so this is how we set up the profile. This is what we want applied. And so we click save, and we click save again here. And then that is going to apply that profile for that group of users, essentially limiting their access to the wizard functionality. And another way to use groups to apply that functionality, that limitation, is to create a new group. So if we navigate to the users groups module again, now we can create a new group, and we will call this one Wizard Deny. And we click edit here, and then again we'll select Secretariat, Wizard Access, move that to limited, and then we have the Few Wizards profile. Again, this is how we want the settings applied to this group of users. We save and close, and now what you'll notice is this access level is unspecified. And so, or for every other piece of security, it's unspecified, and what that means is this is going to be a secondary group that a user would be a member of. And so when you add a user to this Wizard Deny group, the other security permissions that they have from another group that they're a part of will be applied because these are all unspecified. The only one that will change here is the wizard access. And one thing to note is that when you are assigning an individual user to multiple groups, the most limited security permissions will apply. So if a user is a part of a full access group which has access to the wizards and this wizard deny group, they will not have access to the wizards because the most limiting security permissions will apply. And so to add someone to this group, I would click over to membership and then move their name into the included users column. And so that is how we can set permissions for groups of users, 2 different ways there. And now we will talk about how to set security permissions for an individual user. And as an example here, what we are going to do is we are going to use the security attributes to disable the hot add feature for a single user. And so if we had one user who had been misusing the hot add feature and creating duplicates, we want to revoke access to that feature, this is how we can do that. And so in Suite Manager, we are going to go to the Users and Groups module again, and then we want to make this change applicable for the user Annie Brown. So we highlight her name, and then we will click the Edit button here. And this is also where we would change her password if we needed to, lock her out, make her inactive, things like that. But we just want to change the security permissions right now. We're also able, though, to see what groups she's a part of. So we can understand that the security permissions of the full access users are what she's going to have access to generally, but we want to change them for this user specifically. So we click over to Security Attributes, and we'll see the Allow Hot Ads button here, or the Allow Hot Ads permissions here. So currently, she is allowed. And so what these three different columns mean is inherited access refers to the security permissions that are given to this user, Annie Brown, because of the group that she's a part of. And then the override access refers to the security permissions that are applied to this user specifically. And then cumulative access is what this user is actually capable of. And so you'll notice that the inherited access column has a set of security permissions defined from the group that she's a part of. And then all the override access here is unspecified. And so that means that these are going to carry over unless we are making specific changes for this user. And then what we're going to do is we want to, again, revoke her ability to use the Hot Ads functionality. And so we are going to click here and deny that functionality for her. And now we'll see that her inherited access still remains allow because of the group that she's a part of. We've changed the override access to deny, and then her cumulative access is now denied. So this is what will actually exist for her in the system, so she will not be able to use the Hot Ad functionality. And we can click Save, and that is going to take us out to the main user group page, and we can exit out of Suite Manager because we have successfully applied that security permission for that user. And so that was a very high-level overview of some of the functionalities that exist in Suite Manager that allow you to control what your users are able to see and do within the system. So just as a recap, going over some of the content that we covered, we looked initially at worldview sites, which is a way of administering abilities to users to control what they're able to see. And again, just as an example, because I know it's a little bit hard to grasp if it is a feature that you are unfamiliar with, how I like to think about it is if you were to put two people standing at the equator and you had one facing north, one facing south, those are going to be your two worldview sites, where the person facing north is going to have a worldview of the northern hemisphere, and then the person facing south, their worldview is the southern hemisphere. And so they're only able to see those pieces of information as that applies in your database. Hopefully that example clears things up a little bit rather than confusing all of you. And then again, we looked at profiles. And now profiles, we have view and type profiles. The type profiles are a way to control what your database is showing to all users. The view profiles is a way to control what your users are able to see in the database. And then finally, we looked at security permissions as a way to control what your users are able to do how they're able to interact with all the data that you have stored in Secretariat. And we talked about how to set those at the group and the individual user level. And so, if you have any questions on any of the content that we've covered, please chat those to all panelists. We are going to collect those questions, and then we will answer those in just a minute after we talk about some tips and tricks. And so as a way to use this information that we've covered in application for your instance of Secretariat, the biggest tip and trick is use the security groups as a way to quickly assign and change permissions of multiple users to adapt to your changing business environment. And so as we talked about with the second example of denying access to certain wizards, you can create new groups, and as long as the unspecified boxes are checked for the different permissions, you can use groups to change one access level for multiple users all at once without affecting what they're able to do already in the system. So if you had one change that you wanted to make, that is going to be a very quick and efficient way to make that change. Secondly, you can ensure the integrity of your data by using view profiles and type profiles to assign permissions to users. So this is a great way of controlling what users are able to do at a very specific level and a global level when you're using the type profiles. So if you wanted to enable a new tab, such as the Canadian Information tab that we enabled, you can do that very easily. And again, we want to do that to ensure the integrity of your data, make sure that everything is trustworthy and up to date in your systems. And then third tip we have here is use the Tools module to verify view profiles and worldview sites are set up appropriately. So as we touched on in the webinar just before, when you click over the Tools page, you will be able to select the drop-down of the view profile, and if you are assigned to multiple view profiles, you can quickly see what other users who have that view profile assigned to them are going to be able to view and interact with in the system. And then our final tip is when you are implementing worldviews, or if you need to make changes to worldviews that already exist, a very quick and effective way to do that is using the Site Administration tool. Again, this is under the Tools page in Secretariat, and you need to have the unlimited access rights applied for yourself as the user who's going to be making these changes. And then, again, it's just a quick click and highlight the entities that you want to change, and you can move those over very, very easily. And so any questions on anything, please chat those in. We want to be able to address those for you now. And we'll let you bring those to our attention while we go over just a few pieces of Mitratech news. The first bit is, are you receiving the monthly newsletter? And if you are not, please let me know so I can add you to the distribution. We use the newsletters as a way to announce what's going on here at Mitratech, as well as what we have upcoming, and specifically webinars like this one. Additionally, in the most recent newsletter, which I hope you all received, we have a solution utilization checklist, which is a survey that I created as a way to identify underutilized features or maybe features that aren't well understood, so that way we can know that those are topics of interest for future webinars or training opportunities for our users. So please fill that out. That is a great source of feedback in defining the direction of the Client Success Program here at Mitratech. And then we also had product roadmap webinars recently. Our product management team provided a very in-depth view of the future of Secretariat, and I know that was a topic of interest for a lot of users who I've spoken with, And so if you were not able to see the webinar, or you simply want to be able to revisit the recording, please email csa@mitratech.com, and I will make sure that you get access to those recordings so you can see that information. And now finally, we have the Ideas portal, and I can send this link out to you all, but the web address is there at the bottom. And this is a way to communicate directly to the product management team what enhancements you would like to see applied to Secretariat, a way to influence the product roadmap that we have. Not only will you be able to submit your own ideas, but you'll also be able to view, discuss, and vote on your colleagues' ideas. And so ideas with a lot of vote and support are going to be brought to the attention of the product management team. Well, all of them will, but special attention will be paid to ones that receive a lot of votes. So do make sure that you are interacting with the Ideas portal as a way to influence the direction that Mitratech is taking in developing the future of Secretariat. And so now we are going to take a look at some of the questions that came in from all of you. Again, thank you for participating here. Let's take a look at some of these questions. So the first question is, what does override access mean specifically? And so again, we touched on this during the webinar. This is a way to define security settings for an individual user separate from the group that they are a part of. Next, we had, if a user is in two groups, what security settings apply? And so this question came in before. We addressed it at the end, but just to recap, the more restrictive of the two groups is going to apply. And so if you have a user as part of two groups, the most restrictive access of both groups is going to apply to that user to control what they're able to see in the database. And then we also had a question, again, what is the difference between view and type profile? And so I hope it's clear. If it's not, please do let me know. We can discuss this by email and how to set this up in your instance of Secretariat if this was your question. But the view profile controls what a user is able to see, and the type profile controls what Secretariat is showing to the users. And so what does limited access to worldview groups mean? And so what we have defined is limited access are the profiles. So we are limiting their access to worldview groups by defining those profiles. And if we have unlimited access, that means they're going to be able to see all profiles. And now one thing to note is that a user must have access to a worldview site to be able to view any information in the system. If they are not assigned to a worldview, they will not be able to log into Secretariat. And so I'm going to let a few more questions come in while we bring up another poll question. Again, we are very interested in your feedback. We want to know whether this information was useful for you and what you would like to see as part of the future of the webinar program. And so we have a couple questions that will pop up on your screen. If you can take a second and answer those for me, that would be wonderful. Really appreciate your feedback. So we're going to let a few more questions come in. If you have, please do chat to all panelists and we will address those while you answer those poll questions. And so if you did type in a question and we did not address it now, I will make sure to reach out to you by email. We can set up a phone call to go over those, because a lot of the other questions seem a little bit more specific to individual Secretariat instances, so I can go over those with you individually. So if you asked a question that was not addressed here, I'll make sure to reach out to you individually to discuss that. All right, it doesn't seem like any more questions are coming in, so we will end this webinar now. But thank you again, everyone, for taking the time to participate with this webinar. I hope it was helpful, beneficial for you. And if you do have any questions about how to implement some of the things that we were talking about in your individual instances of Secretariat, do not hesitate to reach out to me. That is really my focus as a client success advisor, is helping to empower all of our users to use the features that are available in Secretariat, specifically the ones that we are highlighting here in our webinar. Look forward to speaking with you all here in the near future. So thank you all for participating, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. But again, any questions that you did not get a chance to ask during this webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to me by email. You can contact me at csa@mitratech.com. Okay, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.